Here. Hey guys, Mr. Corbin here with Miss Powell, and we're going to be talking to you today about irrational and rational numbers. And so, Miss Powell, we've got to define these before we get started, don't you think?
Yes. So, first definition is, can you hit that little X up there? I think that makes it bigger. Okay.
All right.
Rational numbers are any numbers that can be written as a ratio. Now, you got to think of what's the difference of a ratio compared to a fraction.
Okay, so a ratio is a comparison of two numbers by division. So that can be a fraction for sure.
Right.
But that also means that there's more than just a fraction that are rational numbers or that can be a ratio. So what other numbers can we write, Miss Powell, that are more than fractions and still rational numbers?
Okay, so let's say that I take a whole number 5. Is there a way that I can make that be turned into a ratio, which is a comparison of two numbers? So basically, same thing as saying, can I turn 5 into a fraction?
Right. And so to turn any whole number into a fraction, we just put a 1 under it, right?
Yep. So since I
Miss
can
Powell,
take,
you are so messy. Are you
yes,
guys seeing this?
oh,
Miss
it looks
Powell
good.
is so
It looks
messy.
good.
Okay.
So if I can change it to a fraction, then I would have to say, yes, this is rational.
Okay, so that's for a whole number.
Now, what if I had 2/3?
Okay, well, what I'm thinking right here is that that's already a fraction. And so if it's already a fraction, that means it's a ratio. And so, boom, don't I have a rational number there?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, let's say that you pull out a calculator and you have specific types of decimals. And one specific type of decimal would be what's called a terminating decimal.
Okay, so now wait a minute, Miss Powell. So you're going from fractions to decimals. We can turn decimals into fractions. We just can't turn all decimals into fractions, right?
Right.
So not all decimals are going to be able to turn into a ratio. So if we have numbers that can turn into ratios, what are the numbers called that we can't turn into ratios? Because I know we have decimals that will not turn into fractions. What are those called?
Okay. So numbers that cannot be turned into a fraction is the opposite of rational, which would be irrational. So
Okay.
irrational numbers are numbers
Right.
that cannot be written as a ratio. So far, we've came up with a whole number can be turned into a fraction. A fraction is automatically irrational because
Right.
it's a fraction.
So with decimals, it just depends.
It depends.
We've got to see. Okay, so show us the decimals that can be written as a ratio.
Okay, so let's say that I end up with the decimal 0.56 and it doesn't go on any further. So since it doesn't go any further, it stops.
Okay,
So what type of decimal is that?
We call that a terminating decimal, don't we?
Yes.
And so I know that there's an old movie that some people still remember called The Terminator. And the Terminator, he used to end people's lives, right? And so he stops their life. And so I always remembered that as a kid, the Terminator terminates the life. So a terminating decimal means it stops, it ends right there. And so terminating decimals are always rational numbers.
Okay, so 0.56, we like to say 0.56 because it's a quick way of telling students how to say it. But if you actually said it correctly, the 5 is in tenths place, the 6 is in hundredths, and we won't get into the whole lesson of that, but you would say this is 56 hundredths, which would be 56 over 100. Then you would simplify it. Now, the nice thing is the calculator will automatically do all of those steps. If you hit second, fraction, decimal, some button that different calculators have at different places, then it turns that terminating decimal into 14 over 25, which is a comparison of two numbers.
And
so that would be rational.
Right. And that's a pretty handy skill to have, whether you have a calculator or not. You take that last decimal place, and whatever place value that is, that's your denominator. And then you put the decimal over that and reduce it, and that's where they get the 14 over 25. So 56 hundredths, like you said, is 56 over 100. That reduces to 14 over 25. But it's really nice that the calculator will do that for us when we can use the calculator.
Okay, so let's say that I have another type of decimal, and I'm using this, but this time it doesn't end. But it does have a pattern. So let's say it's 0.222222222. So what type of decimal is that called?
Okay, so again, I knew I had a terminating decimal. Well, this is first of all a non-terminating decimal because it keeps going, right? But the pattern is that it repeats itself. So it's a non-terminating repeating decimal. And if I remember right, Miss Powell, repeating decimals can be written as ratios.
Now, let's see if the calculator will help us do that. So find your fraction and decimal button on your calculator, and it turns it into a decimal. I mean,
All
a
right.
fraction.
Yes.
Now, it
We
could
knew what
be-
you meant, Miss Powell.
It could be like, and you could have like 5.2626262626. I mean, it could go on like
They can't
this.
see it, Miss Powell. You're going to have to move it down. Thank you.
Oh, you made me mess up.
I made you mess up? Miss Powell is not showing you guys on the screen, and I made her mess up.
Okay, so 2626. You got to just do it enough to where the calculator understands that it is a repeating decimal. So then when you go and you ask the calculator to turn it, you may actually get what's called a mixed number. And different calculators displays it. But see that U, that's a break. So
Right.
5 is your units place. So it's 5 and 26 over 99.
Well, and it's always a good thing to remember, too, that when you have a whole number and a decimal, it's just the whole number plus whatever the decimal is. And the decimal is the piece of the whole or the fraction. And so that's what the calculator's showing you right there. It's 5 whole units plus 26 out of 99 of the second, or what would be the sixth one.
Now, sometimes your calculator has like a mixed number and then a improper fraction. So if I hit this, it will take that mixed number and turn it to an improper fraction. And since I was able to turn that into a ratio, it's a comparison of two numbers, then that repeating decimal also was rational. So I can add that to my list.
Okay, so back to the list of rationals. Okay, a rational number is any number you can write as a ratio. A mixed number is automatically going to be a rational number. And then you have a repeating decimal that is also going to be a rational number.
So we've got all kinds. So you got whole numbers.
Right? Whole numbers are automatically in the club.
Fractions.
Fractions.
Whether it's proper.
Right.
Or improper, doesn't matter.
That is so sloppy, Miss Powell. Can you guys read that out there? I don't know, Miss Powell. She's in her own mind.
Now, let's look at something that we don't have on this list. And that's things that we're going to do in another lesson, but square roots of numbers.
Right.
So I'm going to cheat and use my calculator.
Well, now, Miss Powell, before we do that, tell me what this square root thing, what does that big check mark even mean?
Well, it basically just means, is there a number that you can multiply by itself to give you 36? So the calculator tells me the square root of 36 is 6, which goes back to it turned it into a whole number, and that naturally can be made into a fraction. So this definitely is rational.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, going back to the square root. Is this going backwards from squaring something?
Yes.
Because to me, it looks like a way to go backwards. Like when we square something, it was multiplying a number by itself. This is going backwards, right?
Right.
And so it's unsquaring it is really what's happening. A square root means we're unsquaring a number. And so some of those are going to be rational and some of those are going to be irrational.
Now, this is an example of square root of 50. So square root of 50, when I look at the decimal, it's 7.071067812. The problem is with this is that I don't know what the next digit is. It's not a repeating. When I try to cheat and let the calculator turn the decimal into a fraction, it won't. So this is a type of decimal that is non-terminating. It means it keeps going on forever. Terminating. And non-repeating.
Okay, so let me see if I get this straight. We have these things called square roots, and that's unsquaring something. And so I'm looking for a number that is multiplied times itself to give me the number under the radical symbol. Well, not every number that you put under the radical symbol can be multiplied times another number to give you that, right?
Right.
And so we call those irrational numbers. What are the numbers called? Because I know there's a special name for those that are underneath the square root that come out to be a whole number. What are those called?
Perfect squares.
Perfect squares, right.
Which will be in the next lesson.
Perfect squares will be in the next lesson, but certainly need to be mentioned here because the only square roots that are rational are the perfect squares. And like Ms. Powell said, we'll tell you more about that later. But any square root that's not a perfect square is irrational. The only square roots that are that are rational are perfect squares.
So we've got one type of decimal we just now found that cannot be written as a fraction. If it's non-terminating, non-repeating, it's an irrational number. So normally where you see this is square roots, but you also have studied that number pi, which is the same as this symbol right here. If you find the pi button on your calculator, I don't remember where it was.
And to the left.
To the left.
First column.
First column, there it is. Okay, so there's the pi button. When you hit it, it's 3.141592654. Again, that last digit, I don't know what it would be. I'd have to have a computer or something tell me. It goes on forever. It doesn't have a repeating pattern. So pi is another one of those strange numbers where it's a decimal that you cannot turn back into a fraction. Because if I try to use the calculator and cheat again, it's going to spit right back out that decimal because it can't do it.
And Ms. Powell, pi is actually the most famous irrational number. When you think about irrational numbers, pi is going to come up because pi is always non-terminating and it's never repeating. So that means it keeps going infinitely. As a matter of fact, there's supercomputers that have been figuring the digits of pi 24/7 for years now. And it's really just a division problem that they keep adding on a decimal, and it just never ends, and it has no pattern that they can come up with. So pretty famous. Pi is irrational. So
I think that's it for this lesson, and then
All
I'd
right.
say let's break it. We'll check the next lesson.
Okay, guys, we'll certainly be back with you here in just a little bit, and we'll be talking about some more square roots and how we estimate square roots.
Okay, I say let's do a lesson.
And I don't know how to stop it.
Oh, I'll have to edit it. Okay, you'll
Hold
have
on.
to go back into the Chrome. No, Chrome.
I can stop it.